Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. I am Abram Kielsmeyer-Jones, and today's webinar is called Using Accordance to Keep, Not Lose, Your Hebrew and Greek. Today's session is appropriate for readers using biblical languages at all kinds of levels. I'm going to offer multiple suggestions for keeping your language use active. This is not about learning Hebrew and Greek. I've offered a separate webinar for that before. This is about how to retain it once you've got it. And there are likely more ideas in this two-page handout than we'll cover in person, but my goal today is to help you retain what Hebrew or Greek you've learned, whether that's a little bit or a lot. I'm going to show a couple of different or a few different setups. With each one, I'll talk about what you need to know in accordance. So there will be a focus on the feature side of things. And then I'll talk about what particular resources are needed in accordance. So that's the particular modules. Some of these you may not have, but I'm trying to use kind of basic modules that you're likely to have if you're using Greek and Hebrew already. This handout that you're seeing here on my screen is available to you in the handouts section of your GoToWebinar control panel. That panel is what you should see as soon as you log into this webinar. And once you see it, there's a handout section. You can go to that, make sure the arrow is pointing down to reveal the PDF, and then you'll see this, and you can open that up. If you are watching this afterwards on a recording, because we are recording today, you can email me at abramkj@accordancebible.com. Just let me know the name of this webinar, and I'll be happy to email you the handout so that you can get it that way. And if you're here live, you will also get an email with a link to the recording when it has processed, as well as a link to the handout. So if you don't happen to get it now, you can get it then as well. But I will be following the handout, and like I say, there's likely more in the handout than we'll cover today, but I want to give you lots of options, lots of different ways that you could use accordance to keep your Hebrew and Greek. So just by way of overview, first we're going to talk about a dual language setup. Then we're going to talk about using just a single language, so Greek or Hebrew, with audio, the idea there being to engage another sense. And then we'll talk about a single language setup with diagrams and or syntax tools. We'll also talk about just looking at one language at a time to focus in on vocabulary acquisition. And we'll talk about using a grammar textbook as well. And then just a couple of closing things that I'll mention here at the end. So let's start with the first setup that I want to propose, which is a diglot, a two-language setup. So you could either have Greek and English side by side, or Hebrew and English. Now, if you are trying to get better at a language, the best thing you can do is be in that language. So that's why after this one, the setups are going to be single language. But as a transition there, it may be helpful to have a running English translation open at all times. And so that's what we're going to demonstrate first. For this, what you need to know about in accordance are keyed text, key numbered texts, cross-highlighting and instant details. Let me demonstrate this for you, and then we'll talk about what's on the handout here. But I'm going to open up, let's say I've got this NET Bible, 2nd edition with Strong's. And you can see in the title that it's got Strong's there. When I double click it open from my library, the title shows there as well. And this is a text that is tagged with Strong's numbers. So that means that every word here that you've got, there's the corresponding Hebrew or Greek is shown when you hover over it. So if I'm just right here in Genesis 1:1, and I wonder about what is the word for created, I can hover over that word. I'm not clicking it, I'm just resting my cursor on the word created. And in the instant details, I get the Strong's number, H1254. By itself, that's not useful for me. In print, I would go to Strong's and look up 1254 without needing to know Hebrew characters. That's the advantage to Strong's dictionary. In accordance, there's even more than that. I get the Strong's number and I get the corresponding Hebrew in Hebrew characters. I get the transliteration, so depending on If I'm fuzzy on what some of these letters are, I've got the transliteration here and some other information in the instant details as well, including a translation equivalent and a parsing. So all of that information comes up. I'm just hovering over various words here, and you can watch and see how that changes in the instant detail. What's the Hebrew word for earth here? What's the Hebrew word for spirit? And those are all showing right away in the instant details, hence the name. I mean, if you were just to scroll slowly left to right, you see how quickly that changes because it's tracking each word. So that's a key number text. And if you follow the link in your handout, you'll see a more detailed article on that. But I noted here just the relevant portion in the handout. A key number text identifies the original Hebrew or Greek word behind the English translation, and it lets you access original language resources even if you don't know any Hebrew or Greek. So anybody can do this, even if you've never learned the alphabet in Hebrew or Greek. And the instant details are already helping you to get back into your Hebrew or your Greek. Let's say you're feeling very rusty and you're still reading a biblical text in English, but you can just select various words and go over there and see, maybe you remember, oh yeah, bara, or with God, Elohim, I remember that one. And you can start to regain some of your language use that way. But that's just the single text. If we want a diglot open, a dual language setup, we're going to go to add parallel here. And from that add parallel menu, I'll go to texts. And I'm going to pick a Hebrew Bible text in this case. We have a few different ones, but I'm going to open up the BHS. And that font's very small. I can make that bigger. And still, the instant details will happen when I will show something when I hover over a word in English, but now it's also cross-highlighting in Hebrew. So whereas before I hovered over created and it showed this in the instant details, it still does. And now with my Hebrew text open, in parallel, my cursor is where the blue circle is, but it cross highlights over here, and vice versa. I'm starting from English, I'm reading created, and I can see in the instant details and in my Hebrew text that it's bara. Even with the instant details closed, I could do this. So you get a sense of the word by word correspondence for individual words. And this is a step further than just hovering over various words. This is, I'm reading through this text in English anyway. Let's refresh some Hebrew knowledge, and oh yeah, there's the Hebrew text. Maybe I can start with that one. The cross-highlighting works both ways. If you were to set up a diglot like this, a dual language workspace, which again, very easy, it's just two texts, you could go the other way. You could start from Hebrew and hover over a given Hebrew word and see, as I'm doing here, and I'm doing this very quickly, but you can see here I'm hovering over Hashemayim for heavens, and it's showing me in English what that word is, and all the instant details are showing up down there. That's it. That's a diglot. Just a key number text, whether it's the NET Bible or there are other key number texts. I think that link I sent you has a list of them. So it's basically anything that has an S in the abbreviation. So ESVS is ESV with Strong's, Holman Christian Standard Bible with Strong's. You could even just go to your library and type in Strong's and see all of the modules you might already have that are key number text. So whatever cross-highlighting you're seeing here will work with any of these texts. There's one other system, and that's the GK numbering system, which is used with the NIV, Goodrich-Kohlenberger numbers. So that would work as well. I could, in fact, you don't even have to choose. You can do multiple texts at once. So here I've got Genesis 1:1, and I'm hovering over beginning here at the NET key number text. I see it's Reshit in the Hebrew, and it's also translated in the NIV as beginning. Same thing with created, darkness, and so on. You can open up as many of these texts as you want to. If you wanted to compare 3 or 4 different translations to a Hebrew text or an English text, you could do that. And then once you've got this workspace set up, you can do something like, let me go to Genesis 12:1, type it in, and it will go there in all of your texts. You could duplicate this tab. You could add as many translations as you wanted to. There's a lot that you can do with this as a springboard, but at its most basic, think just in terms of a Hebrew text and an English text, or perhaps you want to do an English text and a Greek text. Same kind of setup. Go to Add Parallel Texts. I'm going to pick the NA28 for this. Now you'll notice there's nothing showing here. That's because I'm in Genesis, so there is no Genesis in the NA28, but there is Matthew. So I could just go to Matthew 1:1, and I've got the text here and here. Same, all the same things here. If I hover over genealogy to see what word that is in Greek, cross highlights at right, geneseos, and I can also see the instant details down here. So that's a diglot, and all you need for it is a key number text, and then a Greek Bible or a Hebrew Bible. For an added challenge, you could make it not a diglot. You could actually close the English translation altogether and only use the instant details as needed. And I don't know where you are in your particular Greek and Hebrew journey, and that may even vary from time to time for you. But if you get to a point, especially if it's a text that you're familiar with, or a text that's easier in the language, like John is easier, Greek typically, folks would agree on that, than say Matthew, you might wish to just close your English translation altogether, but know that you still have your instant details anytime you want to hover over a word. Let me note too that with this setup, which again, it's not like there's not much fanfare here. There's not much technical expertise required to do it. We just opened 2 biblical texts in accordance. So there's not a lot to it, but you can use this to, really just spend some time reviewing Greek and Hebrew. You may even consider a reading plan. A good Hebrew starting place would be Jonah or Ruth. In part because they're short, in part because they tend to be well known among folks who have some level of biblical knowledge, and also in part because the Hebrew tends to be easier in those books than in some other ones. Another reason those are good to start with is because they are, for the most part, prose. Jonah has a beautiful poetic prayer in Jonah 2, but typically speaking, prose is going to be easier to understand than poetry. So if you have lapsed in some Hebrew reading, it may be motivating to go back to the Psalms, and so maybe you do that, but also understand that that's poetry, and so that may be harder. So maybe you do that and spend some time in prose. For Greek, and this should say a good Greek starting place, pardon the typo there, a good Greek starting place is 1 John or Mark, and also the Gospel of John would be good. And so as you think about something like a reading plan, you might just consider your goals. Are you reading slowly for vocabulary and grammar? In other words, as I go to, let's just jump ahead to 1 John 2 here as an example. As I read through this chapter, am I interested in going really slowly, word by word? Like, for example, with teknia for children or little child, do I want to explore that as a word study, or do I just want to read through a chapter at a time, or some combination? Do I want to look at the different parts of speech? Agapetoi is vocative. Do I want to spend the time and go back to my grammar and try to remember what that means or review what that means? I would just encourage you to think about what your goals are. You can say, I want to get more proficient at reading Hebrew or Greek, but even as a subset of that, are you focusing in a given period on vocabulary, which we'll talk about that today, actually, and grammar we'll also talk about. Are you thinking in terms of reading greater volume for flow and general understanding of how the language works? I would say that these two tend to be different approaches. Whether you're reading at the more atomistic level, really trying to get into the word by word, nitty gritty. But there's also advantage to just reading large swaths of text, and maybe you don't understand every word and every grammatical construction, but you've read a whole chapter, so you've gotten a sense of how the language flows. I think there's advantages to both. And all of that, as you answer those questions and as you select some kind of reading plan, if you do that, all of that you can do just with the Diglot, which at any time you can choose to close your English text if you want to just look at that particular language. Let me add to this too, and if you've got questions at any time, by the way, there's a questions box. If you're here live, you can type in a question. It's just like a one-way typed chat, and I will respond to that either privately or anonymously. We'll share your question with the group and then respond to everyone. So feel free to put questions or comments there, and I'll stop again in a bit. But another possible setup, and you can even combine it with this first one, but another way to think about gaining or regaining our proficiency in Hebrew and Greek is to think about engaging our oral sense, to use an audio Bible. And in terms of what you need to know how to do in accordance, it's just as simple as the first one. It has to do with opening texts. So I'll open up the NA28, which I can do by searching my library here. Double click that open and go to wherever it is you want to go. Maybe you're reading John 3. And then the next step would be to open up a parallel pane with an audio Bible. Now this typically is a separate purchase. I've hyperlinked in your handout to where you can find it in the store. This is not going to necessarily be included in a collection or package that you already have. All you have to do to see if you already have it, and sometimes those of us who have been using Accordance for a long time, we might forget all that's in our library. Just type in the word audio and you'll see here. So I can double click open my Greek audio from there. But what I really want to do is have it open as a parallel pane. And in this case, it is it's in the sub menu. I mean, if you want to look for the Greek New Testament audio, for example, it's going to be in this sub menu. As many times as I use it, always have to look through these to find them. And so what I often will do is what I just did quickly. I'll open it up in the library, and then it floats to the front of my recent modules. You cannot search this menu, so you would just have to know where in all of your tools is the Greek New Testament audio, and you could certainly take the time to look through that and find that. But again, I think just as useful, it should be actually here in the commentaries somewhere, but just as it's here. But rather than do that, again, just as a kind of hack, I'll open it up from the library and then open it as a parallel pane. So once I do that, it's going to open it to whatever I've already put in my search entry area, which is John 3. And I'm going to hold on. I'll play that again in a minute. I'm going to think in terms of maximizing my screen real estate. You know, this blank space doesn't really do anything for me, so I can just click and hold this divider and drag it over like so, because I really just need the audio icon here. And now I've got more Greek text here. And as I said, you can even combine this with the first use case, which is a diglot. And so maybe you've got an English text open here. You can use the gear icon to move that up. I don't know why it's not letting me do that. You might have to adjust your panes a little bit. There we go. And you can even move this over here. Take some time and just sort of play around with your screen, but you can end up with something like this, where you're doing Greek, you've got the English there, the cross highlighting the instant details, and you've got the audio. I think if your goal is kind of re-upping your language use, I think as soon as you can get just into that language, I think that's good. But again, do what you need to. I mean, there's no shame in having a diglot open or something like that, having a second language. But this Greek New Testament audio tool and the Hebrew corresponding tool, you can listen to a whole chapter at a time, but it also divides it up by verse. So if I'm reading and then I get, for example, to John 3:16, and I decide, you know what, I want to hear what this sounds like. Maybe I even want to memorize this verse, but maybe I'm struggling with the pronunciation, or I just want to check. You can just click on this icon here and you'll hear this. You should hear this through my computer speakers and microphone.
Hutos garregapisen hateas ton cosmon, hosta ton huion ton monogene edokin. Hina pas hapistuon es auton me apalitai, aleche zoe ionion.
All right, now if I hadn't paused it, it would keep going, because what it does, it's a bookmarked shortcut to that individual verse. And it opens up the file, which is the whole chapter. So if I want to, I mean, you can see by the title here, John 3, I can listen to the whole chapter, but I can also just play a verse at a time if that's all that I want to do. But if you're doing a reading plan, what I might recommend, let's say your reading plan has you reading John 3 for the day, I might recommend just opening up your Greek text, going to John 3:1, hitting play, and going all the way through and following it. I mean, move your cursor word by word or verse by verse if you need to, and follow your way through the audio. And there is a Hebrew audio as well that is split up similarly. That's got a little bit more dramatic flair to it. There's a little bit of dramatized narration to it, but that's another option as well for Hebrew. And that will especially help you with things like, is this a Dagesh forte or a Dagesh lene, those details that tend to fall out over time, and how do I pronounce this word, and what is this accent doing? So I recommend an audio. It's engaging in other sense. Even better is if you can find other people to read with, whether that's in a virtual setting or in person. And if you've got an audio Bible handy, you can always double check your pronunciation. But in that case, or even if you're by yourself, you might even just repeat it back. So you're hearing, you're seeing the text, you're hearing the text with one of these audio Bibles, and then you're saying the text. You're actually practicing the words as best as you can. There is not a way to slow down this file. That is a long-standing feature request. Maybe someday we'll see it. So you can't actually slow down or speed it up. But what I often will do is just be ready for a phrase. So I might say, all right, I'm going to read this next part. His name was Nicodemus, and I'll just be ready.
Nicodemus anima auto.
And I might stop and repeat that. Nicodemus anima auto. And in that way, I engage more senses, which helps, I think, with not just proficiency, but also with really retaining it, whatever I'm reading in that moment. All right, I'm going to stop there or pause there and see what questions or comments you have so far. We've looked at this dual language setup. We've looked at a single language with audio. You can mix and match. You can build on this. You can have 5 English key number texts with 1 Greek text if you want, and an audio. You can decide what's most helpful to you. But we've looked at cross-highlighting, instant details, key numbers, and we've looked at the audio tools that are available for Greek and Hebrew. But let's pause there before we move on and see what questions or comments you might have. Yeah, somebody's add parallel reference tools, Greek audio. Yeah, at least in mine, I don't know, maybe this has changed in Accordance 14. I'm on Accordance 13, but at least in mine, it's still under commentaries. But I wonder if that changed. Another thing you can do too is you can actually move it up in your library so that it is your top commentary. And so if your commentary is here, you can drag it up and insert it there so that it shows early on. But I am so, I mean, as many times as I've used this menu, I'm so used to just taking 5 seconds to type in Hebrew audio, double click it open. I can, now it's not a parallel pane, so I can close it, but now I can get it as a parallel pane in the recent modules. I find that just as quick. But that's another possible feature request is, could this menu be searchable? That would save time. There's no reason we should have to memorize what belongs to what category, but yeah, you would find it under reference tools. Okay, you're running Accordance 14, so that may have changed. Great, all right, thanks for that. All right, yeah, your mileage may vary on that, but at the least that shortcut or that sort of hack of opening it up so that it floats to the top of your recent modules, I find that good. All right, let's talk about, and this is kind of under the read slowly approach. Let's look at a setup which is a single language with diagrams or syntax. Now, this is going to be one of those parts of the webinar where there's a lot more here in the handout than we'll cover. And that's so that if you want to go further with this, hopefully you're well resourced. There are a couple different ways that Accordance will visually show you the text. One is through diagrams, which we've got in Greek, and the other is through syntax trees, which we've got both in Greek and Hebrew. All three of these articles are really good PDFs that explain the philosophy behind these different ways of modeling the text. Let's start with the Greek diagrams. If you learned Greek, that's probably the one you're most likely to already know. I'm going to keep my Greek text open here. You can even keep the audio text open if you want, but I'm going to close it for now. Add parallel. This one's really easy to find because it's under diagram. It's got its own tool, or it's got its own menu here. So I'm going to open up diagram of Greek New Testament. Now, Accordance has its own tool where you can make your own diagram. This is already completed diagrams. So I've got John 3:1 showing here, and you can, I would encourage spending some time just making sure this pane is sized how you want it. Some of these sentences get pretty long, but you've also got the font icon there that you can change. So, all right, let's say this is how I want it sized. What you'll see here is there's a couple of things. First of all, that cross highlighting that we were showing with Greek and a key number text, that also works here, moving from text to diagram, and vice versa. So if I'm just reading off of the diagram, I can see where the word is in the biblical text. And if I'm just reading off the biblical text, I can see where it is in the diagram. This is especially useful because these diagrams don't put the words in text order. You can see here the first word here is ein, and that's, I mean, you have to scroll or move right a little bit before you see that word here. They organize the sentence and the phrases according to subject and predicate, basically. And so the basic unit of organization here is going to be this horizontal line split by a vertical line, at the left of which is the subject and all its modifiers, and at the right of which is the predicate and all of its modifiers. And some of these sentences are going to be simpler than others. Some will be more involved. John 1 is a good example of fairly simple sentence diagramming. I mean, that's fairly, you know, you've got halagos as the subject in each case, and we've got ein with something else as the predicate in each case, and these are joined by kai because these are compound sentences working together. So this is useful for understanding what's modifying what, and it may be more readily evident in something like John, but when you get to Ephesians 1:3 and following, for example, you get this all kinds of modifications. And in fact, this is where you'll need to be creative. If you've got an external monitor, which I do not, you're at an advantage because you can really spread out your screen. But you can see here, again, all of this is based on a vertical line with subject at left and predicate at right, but it gets much more advanced than that because there are all the modifiers. You've got things like this equal sign where you've got the Lord, that is Jesus Christ, and you've got other things here. But this Randy Leedy article here talks about why you would consider diagrams in the first place. So that's another option you might consider. This is probably not something that I would do if I were really rusty in Greek and Hebrew and wanted to regain it. I might not jump right into a diagram, but if I've got enough confidence that I can read a few verses at a time with some help, but not a lot of help, I might also then move to the diagrams and start to do something more more atomistic, more kind of bit by bit here for deeper study. And in Hebrew, there is not a diagram tool, but there is a syntax tree. So I'm going to open up a Hebrew Bible in this tab here, go to Add Parallel, and instead of diagram, I mean, you can't, nothing will open there because we're not in the Greek text. We'll go to syntax, and we'll open up, there are two different syntax tools. Again, I've hyperlinked to these. This exceeds the scope of what we'll do today, but you can read more about the syntax database. But this is structured pretty differently. And you've got terminology to learn, things like complement. You've got some familiar stuff like subject and predicate, but then you've got complement and adjunct and independent clause and adjunct clause, and speech is marked here. But the basic way of understanding this is that it goes from individual phrases to the larger phrases that contain them. In fact, if this visual isn't helpful for you, you can move this down and it will give you the same tool, only in vertical orientation. So if that's easier to see, and then type in a verse and it will follow you there. And you can see how the different parts of speech relate to each other. There's some learning involved with this. And so again, I've linked to some PDFs there that you can look at. There's also a Greek syntax tool so that you can look at that same, see how it's the same structure, same abbreviations, complement, adjunct, things like that. This is fun if you want to really go deep on structure. You can go to a passage and see how it is diagrammed and also what it looks like in syntax, and notice all the cross highlighting that's happening here. That's going to help you kind of keep your place and see how a given word is understood both in the diagram and in the syntax tree. So that may feel, I mean, that's more on the grammatical, let's dive deeper side. This is, I would not, for example, I mean, unless I had a lot of time, I would not read my Jonah chapter 1 reading of my reading plan today with a syntax tree open. I might, but for that, I might be more likely to just open up Jonah 1 and read it through, maybe with an English text open, maybe not. But then if I were to study it or to preach on the first few verses or something, I might be more likely in that case to open up this syntax tree to get into the structure of the text. Lots of hyperlinks on this one, so I encourage you, if you're interested, to check that out. And I've also linked to the diagrams and syntax tools that are available in accordance. But just like the first two setups, we've done all of this from the Add Parallel pane, and it all builds on each other. Again, you could have Greek, English, audio, diagram, and syntax tree all open in one workspace if you wanted to, or you could just do one at a time. Let's talk about vocabulary. That was grammar. So let's talk about vocabulary. One of the ways that we can think about approaching reading Greek and Hebrew is through the lens of vocabulary and thinking about what is the most frequently occurring vocabulary. Mounts has a good note on this in his grammar, which I'll just go to the beginning of. And he talks about, let me just see if I can find it. He talks about how, yeah, here it is. There are some 5,423 different words in the New Testament that occur a total of 138,167 times. And he says in his textbook, after every vocabulary section, students are told what percentage of the total word count they now know. By the 8th chapter, and you can see his lists in here, the student will recognize more than 1 out of every 2 word occurrences. So the idea with vocabulary and kind of thinking about it numerically is that as you add to your vocabulary, of course, you're just going to know more and more of the Greek New Testament. In fact, he gets more specific with his stats here. There are only 313 words out of 138,000 some occurrences that occur 50 times or more. And these words account for 80% of the total word count. So he's basically crunched the numbers to say, if you learn, this number of lists or this many lists of vocabulary, you're going to have 80% of the words in the New Testament. Or even the word Kai, if you learn that word, it occurs 9,000 times, so you're going to see it a lot, and you know 6% of the vocabulary of the Greek New Testament. So that approach is fairly common, that you would start with more frequently occurring vocabulary. And of course, if you think about natural human language acquisition, this tends to happen with babies too, that they might learn the most necessary, most frequently occurring words. Maybe they're saying mama or dada because those are the most frequently showing up people in their lives. What's interesting about Accordance is you can get this grammar and look at Mounts' lists. There are other vocabulary tools available in Accordance. You could even go to the store, go to File, New tab, Web Browser, and I might even just type in vocabulary. You'll see a number of tools that are available, like some book-by-book guides. So I would recommend those. But you can also do this yourself. You can make your own list with a Greek text. So that's what I want to spend just a moment on now. Here's the NA28 text again. We could do this in Hebrew, it works the same. But I've put a step-by-step guide here for how to do word frequency searches, basically. And for that, you want the count command. Accordance uses the count command to surface words that occur a certain number of times. So if I want all of the words that occur only one time in the New Testament, not that that's where I would start. I mean, that's the last place I would get to in my memorizing. But if I were just curious, I would go to words, right click, enter command, count, and I would just type in the number 1. This will show me all words that occur one time. And not surprisingly, we get some of these names in the genealogy of Matthew. And we'll get some other words that may not be familiar to me, like this word for 2 years old, I did not know. More helpfully, though, you can search not just a particular word frequency, but a range. So you can do words that occur between 1 and 100 times. Or you can do, you could phrase that as 100 times or fewer. So count 100 times minus. And if I do that search, again, here's Matthew with the genealogy. What that's going to do is that's going to highlight words in red and bold. That's what you can change that in your settings, but that's the default setting. It will highlight words that are hit results, which is to say it will highlight words that occur 100 times or fewer in bold and red. And what I can do with this information now, I can always change the number. Maybe I want to do 50, but I can change the number, but I can see now, all right, these are words that I'm maybe less likely to know. Let's say I've learned Mounts' vocabulary lists up through 101 occurrences or something like that. Then I could take 100 times minus, and those words that are in bold and red, I could say, all right, those are ones where I'm going to check the instant details, because they occur 100 times or fewer. But these other words that don't show up, that is, that occur 101 times or more, I'm not going to check the instant details because I should know those. I'm going to puzzle through those, for example. And so you can see here, you know, Matthew's probably not the best place to start with this just because of all the names. But if I jumped ahead to John, you can see here, mercifully, that there are a lot of words in black that are not hit words. Again, my hit words are the infrequently occurring vocabulary, count 100 minus, or you change it to 50 if you want, or 75. So as I make my way through this text, and I might even do this without an English translation open, I would focus on the ones in black to kind of encourage myself. And I've got, you know, a whole phrase here. And then the ones in red and bold, I'll say, all right, I'm going to hover over those and see in my instant details what that word is. If you take this approach, just be advised that this is working as it should. It's finding words that occur 100 times or fewer. You'll notice that it appears, well, it doesn't just appear, but verse 6 is not in my hit results, neither is verse 8. So it appears as though verses are missing from the text. They're not. It's just that verses 6 and 8 of John 1 don't have any hit words for this particular search string. In other words, there are no words in John 1:6 and 1:8 that occur 100 times or fewer. And that's actually great because that means I should be able to read those verses without help if I've learned my vocabulary 101 times and up. So how to show them, just slide your context slider. That's this circled number here. Slide it over. I'm just going to slide it all the way to A because with context slider set at 0, it's only showing you verses that have hits. But in this case, if I'm reading through the text, I want to see A, all text. And now, sure enough, there's John 1:6 and there's John, what was the other missing one? Let's just go back. Oh no, I'm sorry, John 1:8 is there, my mistake. John 1:6 is not showing here. And so I want to see John 1:6, slide context slider to A, and sure enough, here's John 1:6. No bold red hit words, it's all black. So again, I might just say I'm not going to check the instant details for this. Here's a whole verse that I can at least puzzle my way through. Of course, you're just a flick of the finger away from instant details if you need them. But this can help as you're reading through text to know, all right, what words do I want to really focus in on? What are some words where I'm not going to stress if I don't know them? Maybe it's not a problem that I don't remember skenosin because it shows up in occurring 100 times or less, or in fact, this one is only one time. So if you would change this even to 25, you'll see that word would show up there too. So this is a flexible search area. You can change that. I'm not going to go through this now unless you've got questions, but if you want to, I put a step-by-step guide here for how to actually permanently highlight your hits in your text. Not permanent like you can never ever change it, but what you're seeing here is a temporary bold and red. Like here's John 1:5. If I were to open up a new NA28 over here and go to John 1:5, you'll see that it does not have those words highlighted and in red, but you can make it that way if you want this to be a semi-permanent feature of your text. And I've given a link by link, or I'm sorry, a step-by-step guide here for how to highlight all of the hits and have them stay with that text. Otherwise, when I undo my search or search for something else, those hits go away. And that may be the way you want to read the text, because maybe you're changing numbers. Maybe you want to do, all right, show me words that are 25 times or fewer. Or maybe you want to do the inverse of this. Instead of 100 minus, you do 100 plus. Show me words that occur 100 times or more. And those are the words I want to see highlighted and bold and red. And that's going to give me, maybe visually, that's more appealing to you. And then it's just these non-hit words that you look up in that case. Everything I showed you in Greek works in Hebrew. It will also work for the Septuagint if you want to learn Greek via the Septuagint. So you can do the same count command there. Pick a number, do a range, and that same thing will happen. Just go to the Hebrew text and show you that. BHS. You can change this to words. I'm typing in count, getting a keyboard shortcut. Again, pick your number, 50 minus, and that search will run usually pretty quickly. Of course, now I say that and it's taking a little bit longer. We've got more text to search here, but there's your list of results. And again, remember that you're going to want to take this context slider. Like here, I see Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, but not Genesis 1:3. That's just because, again, Genesis 1:3 has no words that occur 50 times or fewer, which is great news for me if I'm trying to be encouraged in my language learning. And there it is. They're all non-hit words, so they occur 51 times or more. And so I've got that showing there. Let's talk about grammar. So this is vocabulary, and we talked about grammar already with the diagrams and the syntax, but I mentioned mounts. You probably will reach a point where you're going to want to look up a particular construction, or I mean, you can look at the vocabulary lists. Most grammar textbooks will have them, not all. But in a grammar textbook, Accordance has different search fields so that you can really get a lot out of it. If I go, for example, back to mounts, and I've got the 3rd edition in my library, where it's up to the 4th edition now, but this is what I have. This is what I learned on. So I can scroll through here and just look until I find stuff. I've got table of contents I can browse, but I can also, I showed evocative word before. I can also search by any number of search fields. Let's go to titles and see, does he have vocative in here as a title? Sure enough, there's a whole section on it, which is great. So I could search that by English content or even all English, and I could see, there's 16 hits. Maybe that will be my next search. But typically when I'm looking at a grammatical category, I'll search a particular grammar by title or entry. And so here's titles, here's vocative, hit enter, and then I've got it as a heading. And so this is going to be really relevant because I can brush up now on what the vocative is. So pick your grammatical category. Maybe this comes up as you're looking at the diagrams or the syntax trees, or even just the instant details. Maybe you forgot all about the imperative or something like that. Type that in and there's a chapter there and you can read through it. So different search fields can maximize the usefulness of the grammar, but you can also open up the grammar as part of your info pane as you work through a text. So this first one is kind of the standalone approach. Like, I'm going to go to a grammar with a particular category in mind. But suppose I'm doing one of those reading plans, and let's switch over to Hebrew now. So let's say I'm reading Jonah. Here's Jonah. If I go to add parallel in info pane, there is a section called grammars. I'm just going to drag this up here. I'm going to click, hold, drag, and drop grammars. And I've got lots of stuff in the info pane here, but I've got grammars now that are opening up to particular verses if they have content that has that verse reference in it. So for example, I'm in Jonah 1:2 right now. You can see that here and here. And maybe I'm reading it through, but I also want to see, all right, do my grammars have anything to say? Maybe I don't even know what grammatical construction I'm looking for. I just want to see, is there something they point out? Well, here's Juan Muraoka, and you can hover over it and see Jonah 1:2 is right there. You can also click and it will open in a new zone. And here's Jonah 1:2. Actually, it runs the search for me, so it will highlight it in bold and red as a hit. And so I can see, well, there's 2 hits. Here's one of them. What is this? Well, it's an attribute in apposition. and it's going to give me that as an example. I can navigate down by hit and see here's an adjective and a proper noun. So there's Waltke and O'Connor. They've got something for Jonah 1:2. You may need to scroll up and see what's going on here, but you've got, it looks like the similar, the same grammatical construction here. But as you read through the text, I'm just scrolling down, you'll notice your grammars will change because there may be something in a different grammar about that verse. There's no Juan Muraoka and no Waltke and O'Connor here, but there is Pratico and Van Pelt because they do have Jonah 1:3 listed in their grammar. So again, I'm not going to the grammar looking for a particular grammatical construction. Maybe I'm starting from the text, but one of my goals that day is I'm just going to click through any references in my grammars just to see. So click, and this is more of an excursus than it is a particular grammatical category, but this would still probably be very useful as I'm working my way through the text. Whatever you have in your library by way of grammars will show up here. So again, I'm just hitting the down arrow. It's going to vary from verse to verse. Some will have more than others. And you can do this in Greek as well. So that's the two different ways I think of to use a grammar in accordance, using the different search fields as a standalone to really maximize it. Even with that approach, you can search by reference. And you may also want to have it open as a parallel pane. If you have some grammars in your library already, you might just start with those. You can also go to the Accordance store and just type in grammar and see. That's typically grammar and textbook are used interchangeably. And then let me close with these last two, and then we'll leave some time at the end for any questions you might have. I would encourage, as an ongoing approach, however you mix and match from any of these use cases that I've suggested, to always have Greek and or Hebrew open when working on a given text. This is especially, like let's say you've learned both languages and you want to retain them. That's even easier when you're in the Old Testament because you can open up a Hebrew Bible text and a Septuagint, so the Greek translation of the Hebrew. And in that way, you can be looking at Hebrew and Greek all at the same time. So if I have my, well, let's say I start in English, so there's my NET. I can, let's just go back to Genesis 12:1. Add parallel. I can open up my Hebrew text here, and I can open up my Septuagint text. Can spend some time to adjust the settings and how it looks. We didn't talk about the gear icon here, but for extended reading, once you've got your workspace set up, you might also think about set text pane display. You'll notice I've got different background color on the LXX. I find that easier to look at for a long time than just the white background. So you can go to set text pane display and go to customize theme. That will open up another part of the preferences, and that's where you can change things like the background, font size, font color. I mean, that's really just worth playing with until you find something that you like. There also are, under set text pane display, some preset themes. And so you can just select one of those. It will give you a preview right there. Maybe you look at that and think, oh, that's exactly the one I want. And so now you've got that. And then all the cross highlighting still happens. You're just looking at a different display. And again, that's worth some time if you're going to look at the text for a long time. But here, maybe I'm not reading through a part of the Hebrew Bible, but I've got an option for working on Hebrew and Greek at the same time. So hovering over the word Lord, we've got that cross highlighting, and I've got Yahweh, or read out loud Adonai in the Hebrew text, and Kyrios in the Greek text. So in that way, I can work on both languages at once. So if you have both languages and are trying to retain them or regain them, I find using the Septuagint to be a really helpful way to do that. In fact, what you might even consider doing, I don't think this is on the handout, but close the English altogether, and you're probably going to be stronger in one or the other between Hebrew and Greek, and whichever one that is, maybe that helps shed light on the other. And so maybe the Hebrew text alone, let's say you get 50% of the words, maybe you get 70% of the Greek text, but together working off of each other, maybe you get something like 90%, because the chances that you know either of the words Greek or Hebrew are good. And so that's another option to consider. So that would be that same diglot text approach, just no English translation showing. And yeah, that actually was the last one that I showed. I guess that was on the handout. So let me stop there and say again that I hope something in here is helpful to you. I've tried to offer different approaches that I myself cycle through depending on what my particular goals are at the time. My goals right now, I am both reading through Greek in larger swaths and in smaller swaths. I've got two different setups for that, two different plans. And in Hebrew, I'm reading through Deuteronomy slowly, so I am much more likely to open up a syntax tree for that, stop and do a word study. And so you might just spend some time thinking about what more specifically than regaining my Hebrew do I want to do? Is my grammar really good, but my vocabulary I've just forgotten? Well, in that case, you might want to try this count command. Or is my vocabulary fine, but I don't understand English grammar very well, so, and that's in translation, so Hebrew grammar is, feels even more intimidating. You might think about a syntax tree or even some other tool. Some original language commentaries will even help here, but certainly your grammars as well. So let's stop there and see what questions or comments you have as we start to think about wrapping up today. Here's a great question that I'm very glad to be asked. I'm going to put it anonymously in the chat. Somebody says, do you have any suggestions for review of paradigms? Often the challenge with the learned vocabulary word is that the particular form of the word in the text is hard to recognize because of the word's inflection in the text. Yeah, that's such a good question. So the best approach I found for that, and this isn't necessarily accordance specific, but I don't love just, this is just personally, just the straight paradigm memorization. It's hard to motivate myself for that. So often what I will do, I am motivated to read. And so I'll say, all right, I'm going to read, my 5 verses of Deuteronomy today, or my 1 chapter of John, or whatever it is. And then I'm going to literally set a timer and spend my last 2 minutes just reviewing a paradigm chart. And maybe that sounds a little flippant, but it works for me. And so some of that is just kind of rote use, but it works best when it's in conjunction with reading the text. And then what I notice when I do both at the same time, even in the same sitting, or maybe you do 1 minute of paradigm, 10 minutes of text reading, and then another minute of paradigm review, I tend to notice it in the text more, which reinforces what I'm learning in the paradigm chart, and vice versa. So I guess my best suggestion would be to try to integrate that with reading of the text. As far as finding paradigms in accordance, it's not like there's a paradigms tool per se, but you'll find that in various grammars, and so you might use that as a reference point. In fact, just using Mounce briefly as an example, I would just go to paradigm, and he's going to have, you'll probably need to do something like all English to find that, but he's also got an appendix, I think, where there's a bunch of paradigms there. So whatever it is you're using to refer to, maybe you've made your own chart. Yeah, so that's my best suggestion. If others have thoughts on that, I would gladly welcome them if you want to use the questions box. Yeah, sure, you're welcome. Yeah, person says that integration concept makes a lot of sense. And another thing you can do, this is accordance specific. Let's say you find a particular form or a particular inflection that is giving you trouble. You can search for, I'm just going to make this up, but let's say third person neuter singular accusative. All right, let's say that's hard for me. You can search for the inflected form of that word and see its uses in context. So this is maybe even more integrated than just reading text and looking at paradigms. Here you're seeing all of the places this inflected form occurs, or Fine, search for inflected. All right, so there's only 3 uses. And then you could also search for lexeme, and that will show you all of its inflections, and you could compare the two. So that might be a more integrated way. If you come across a particular parsing that's giving you trouble, or even just that you see and you get and you want to see other uses of it, right click and searching for lexeme and or inflected is a great way to see that particular inflection, or even just that lexical, that word in context. That's another thought. Any other questions or comments? I'm going to end the recording, then I'll stay on live for just a moment.